Hey everybody, Leon here, and I'm trying something a little different with my what used to be my blog, my Diakonos Life blog. Um, just because I think if you notice when you read it, not always a lot of writing that happens. It's kind of have spurts where I'm writing a lot and then I stop and things like that. And it's not that there's a lot I haven't wanted to include, but it's just kind of taking the time to actually sit down and write sometimes is challenging for me. And so I thought I'd just try something a little different where I record a video on some thoughts I'm pondering related to a life focused on serving others. And um, then I'd upload it to maybe my blog and my maybe other social media platforms. We'll see. Um, and who knows, maybe over time, if I get brave, I'll turn the audio into a podcast or something like that. Another idea I'm thinking of with all this is I really would like to get into the habit of interviewing other people I know, friends I know who are living that life of serving others and just kind of helping spread a little bit more of that idea of what does it look like when we live in a focus with a life focused on other people. And so that's kind of what probably will be coming up with the blog and the podcast, or maybe a podcast eventually out of it. But I think today, I actually do have something for today. But I've really been in the last few weeks kind of pondering this whole idea of it's an old theological term called progressive revelation. And, part of it's our discussion in our simple church gatherings for Diakonos community. We've been going through a section of discussions on how to read different parts of the Bible well, because you have to really learn to know how to read everything in its context and how to apply it sometimes in the context. And sometimes you may be able to have to reflect on stuff and go, you know what, I don't see the connection yet. But it's like, particularly it gets awkward at times with some of those Old Testament passages that maybe seem a little violent or seem to promote the idea of genocide and things like that. Um, and you look at that through the lens of Jesus, and I look at everything as the whole Bible points towards Jesus, and Jesus is the fullest revelation of God. And then you look at that stuff through the lens of Jesus, and kind of can be confusing. It kind of leads you in some awkward positions and some awkward thinking. And a lot of people have tried to wrestle with it in different ways. Some people have been like, well, maybe there's two gods. There's the Old Testament God and there's the New Testament God. Well, that's not quite. God's consistent throughout, and that's kind of the revelation we get through the Bible. Some people, I love the interviewers where somebody will be like, you see it on TV, somebody's written a popular New York Times best-selling book, and it's like, so tell me, how did God evolve? As if God changed, because one of the characteristics that we also hold on to about God is that he doesn't change. And so the question becomes, how do we reconcile that stuff? And when I look at it more as maybe a better way to understand it is that humanity has changed over time. Humanity has grown. Human growth leads to a greater capacity to understand the fullness of God. And God made himself known, throughout history. God has made himself known at the level that people, the original hearers and the listeners and readers, would be able to understand. Can you imagine if God were like back 2000 BC, you know, inspires Moses? Well, okay, that's a little earlier than Moses, some people's timelines. But say somebody, inspires somebody to write about, there will be a day when a rocket is going to be launched from Florida with 4 civilians on it, and they're going to spend 3 days touring around the earth. People would look at it and go, what kind of craziness is that? And so I think we have to think of it that way, and sometimes look at those passages that are a little challenging for us and go, I don't know what was going on there. And I don't understand it from my understanding of Jesus and understanding of God through Jesus. But there was something there, and maybe it was just God working within the context of history at that time. And I think God patiently works with us where we're at and extends much grace. And I'm not thankful he does that for me as well, because I'm probably still growing as a person. But I think through history, we have to look at it that way too. And see, we have the advantage of looking back through the lens of Jesus. And unfortunately, um, the people that lived long before Jesus didn't have that lens. And we can't. And the other thing is, then we can't just pluck stuff from that time period and go, oh, let's put that into the 21st century. And here's what we got to do. Here's how we do this, and here's how we apply it, type of thing. And really, that where that kind of comes up for me, and kind of why I've been pondering it a lot, and how it's relevant today, um, is all these conquest passages, and talking with a few friends about them, a few people about that I'm trying to encourage in their faith, and also everything going on right now with Afghanistan, and the resolution or the end of our occupation in Afghanistan for 20 years. You know, you got to the end of there, and it got kind of, it's not looking, it was not well done. And I will say that President Biden holds some responsibility for it. But what I've kind of tried to look at it from a historical perspective, and let's do an accurate telling of history. And so I would share with some of my friends, hey, let's think about everything that's happened in the last 40 years related to Afghanistan. And there's a lot of blame we can pass around. And it really got kind of tricky with one of my relatives when who's very still devoted to President Trump, former President Trump. And when we brought up the 5,000 Taliban prisoners that as part of the peace negotiations, which, by the way, he bypassed the Afghan government and only negotiated with the Taliban, and then told them, the Afghan government, you need to release these 5,000 prisoners. And my relative's response was, well, they should have just tried them as traitors and tried them for treason and executed them. And then there would have been 5,000 dead people and not 5,000 prisoners to let go. I'm like, that's barbaric. Yeah. And in my thinking, at least, it seems kind of barbaric. And as part of the justification that came back, it was, well, the Old Testament shows us examples of times when people have killed their enemies. And I'm like, yeah, but, and it comes down to this whole idea of progressive revelation. If we somehow use the conquest passages to justify the execution of POWs in the 21st century, we're misrepresenting God to the world, and we're presenting a wrong image of God to the world. And we've done this in a lot of ways in the American evangelical movement, particularly as Christian nationalism has taken a prominent role. We've tried to somehow justify the actions of the United States as being the new Israel that's bringing peace to the world, and therefore it's good whatever we do. We're the ones bringing the kingdom of God to the world. We overlook the ways that we have oppressed people, we have mistreated people, and things like that. And in that, we misrepresent God. And then there's a whole generation that comes up and says, well, if this is the God we're supposed to serve, I'm not sure I want anything to do with that. And we've seen examples of that in some high profile people walking away from Christianity and the church. And what I think we have to look at is, whatever the circumstances to what those passages happened in those passages in the Old Testament, the lens of Jesus shows me that that wasn't the long-term pattern that God intended to be carried on forever. Even the most conservative of literalists would recognize that that wasn't what God was intending for now. However they look at how those passages played out in history. And we in no way should use early parts of the Bible as justification for things that we know are contrary to the ways of Jesus as followers of Jesus. If we are truly following Jesus, we need to start from Jesus and let everything else be judged through the lens of Jesus. And we need to realize that some things are not for us to repeat in our world today. however God was addressing the world at that time. It's not for us to repeat today. And I think in that, we learn how to live a life that's focused on others better. We learn how to live a life that forgives our enemies. We learn how to live a life that shows love to all people and shows grace to all people, regardless if we agree with them or disagree with them. And we let go of our sense of, oh, vengeance and violence. And that's what I think God's trying to break us of. And God, part of what's no longer and was never really supposed to be a part of the kingdom of God is the idea that we use violence to control one another. And so therefore, we need to look at what Jesus said and how Jesus says to treat our enemies. Right now, we have Afghan refugees living in our country, and people are having different attitudes about it. We actually have a group that's living within 45 minutes of where my house, that are being settled in a National Guard base here in Indiana. And we have to really understand that these people need to be loved, they need to be welcomed, and that's the way Jesus would want us to respond to them. Well, this was just my thoughts kind of on progressive revelation and really kind of how it gets, instead of some stuffy old um, theology of the past, how does that really apply to us? And how do we take God as he's revealed throughout the Bible and learn how to properly apply the history of God's interaction with humanity to our situation today and to the ways that we serve others today? Thank you.